There are times in all of our lives that we feel alone, isolated, and really wondering, does God know what I'm going through? I had one of those times in my life almost 8 years ago when I was going through brain surgery. Buddy and I see God do tremendous things. We see him heal, we see the miraculous. He was supernaturally healed of thyroid cancer, and now I am going through brain surgery. I remember at 3 o'clock in the morning before I was to go down for the surgery, and I was sitting alone in the bed, and all the bells and whistles around me, all of the beeps, but still I felt alone. I looked up to heaven and I said, God, where are you? Do you know what I'm going through? Do you understand that I've spent most of my life doing your work, ministering your gospel, laying hands on people and then being healed? And here I am. I remember at that time that I felt alone and isolated and really like an unknown. God, do you know my name? At that particular time, I remember the Holy Spirit speaking to my spirit so sweetly. And he said, do you trust me? And I said, where have you been? I can talk to God that way. We're good friends. And he said, do you trust me? I said, yes, with all of my heart. He said, if you will trust me to walk with you through this fire, then I will receive all of the glory. I knew at that very time that God was going to receive all of the glory from what I was going through. There are purposes for what we go through in our lives, even when we feel like we are unknown. Maybe one of the purposes that I went through that, there was an intensive care nurse that came to my bedside after the surgery, and she was checking my eyesight because the tumor was actually on my optic nerve. I could see very well, and she was just amazed. Her name was Brittany. And the Holy Spirit began to speak to me and say, tell Brittany that her grandmother's been praying for her. That was the word of knowledge working through me, one of the gifts of the Spirit. I looked over at her and I said, Brittany, your grandmother's been praying for you. And she said, how did you know that? I said, the Lord just told me. Tears just started to stream down her face. I said, do you need to give your heart to the Lord? She said, I sure do. Do you know that Buddy and I led her to the Lord, me lying there in that bed, and she totally surrendering her heart to the Lord? Maybe that was the reason that I needed to go through that trial. Let me tell you about another unknown that I like to read about in 2 Kings, beginning in verse 5. It says, now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the sight of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. The Syrians had gone out on raids, and they had brought back a captive young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife. Then she said to her mistress, if only my master, who is a great prophet and is in Samaria, would come and heal his leprosy. And Naaman went in and told his master, and saying, thus saith the Lord, from the land of Israel, this girl knows a man. Then the king of Syria said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So they departed. So the backstory with this is that Naaman's maid, an unknown, we don't even know her name. She was one of the captives that Syria had gone into Israel. Israel and Syria were always in battle. That was Israel's major enemy. So Syria would go in and they would take captives and they would bring them to the land. Well, this young maid was a captive, and she was a maid in Naaman's household. Now, she could have become bitter. She was in a place that she didn't want to be at all. She felt alone. She felt isolated. Nobody really knew her name, but there was compassion that came on the inside of her in this place that she didn't want to be. And she looked at Naaman and having pity on him, saying, hey, if my master only knew about him, he has the power to heal him. His name was Elisha. And she's like, well, go get him. Let's see. So Elisha said, hey, we need to tell Naaman, the king of this great army, is saying, go get Naaman and tell Elisha that he needs to go to the river and he needs to go into the Jordan and he needs to dip 7 times. And he's like, well, I don't want to do that. The Jordan River is so muddy. It was really an unusual request. But in the end, he did it. And then when he came up the 7th time, he was totally healed of his leprosy. This pagan man who was living in Syria, who was a great man of valor, now had experienced the mighty miracle working power of God because of a compassionate maid that we don't even know her name, the unknown. But the thing is, God knows her name. God knows what we're going through today. God knows our names. But this was for the glory of God. What's so astonishing is that we read in 2 Kings 15, and Naaman returned to the man of God and all of his aides, and they came and they stood before him after he had been cleansed. Indeed, now I know there is no God in earth except the God of Israel, and therefore go give this man a gift. Because of the unknown maid, because she was in a place that she didn't want to be, God worked through her to touch this man, and not only this man, but also the entire nation of Syria. This man now had a testimony. Naaman said, there's no other God like this God. Why are we going through things that we're going through today? So God can receive all of the glory. Are we going through things we don't want to go through? Yes. Is it hurtful? Is it painful? Yes. But we go through them so that we can have a testimony, so that God will receive all of the glory. I want to tell you today, God knows who you are. You are not an unknown to Him. He knows every situation. He knows every hurt. He knows every heartache. He knows when you feel that isolation. And yes, I felt that isolation. And I've known Him all of my life. But there was a time that I said, God, where are you? There was even a time with Jesus when He was on the cross, going through that horrific death. He was beaten. He was bruised, a crown of thorns upon His head. He was stretched between heaven and earth with nails in His hands and His feet. And He cries out to God and He says, oh, my Father, my God, why have you forsaken me? Even the Son of God felt isolated. But we know that there was a resurrection day. I want to tell you today that whatever you're going through, you may feel like you're going through a death, but there's a resurrection day that's coming to you. And I'm here before you today as a miracle, telling you my testimony, being really real and honest and vulnerable, transparent with you, saying, yes, there are times in my life that even though I'm seasoned in the Lord and I know His word and I love Him, that I feel alone and isolated. But that in those times, that's when God says, do you trust me? Yes, with all of my heart, because there is a greater glory. There's a greater plan. Be encouraged today. Know that if you are going through that isolation period, it's only a season, that God has a plan. You're going to have a great testimony coming through this. I hope you have a very blessed day.